It's a little bit of a weird Mother's Day for me this year. My wife is not here because my daughter has a softball tournament because sports have taken over our lives like everyone else's. But on the plus side, I'm not sure exactly who brought it, but I know Bentley was the one who gave it to me. There was a Coke bottle brought today with the name Vanessa on it, so I was able to take a picture at the Mother's Day photo station with Vanessa next to me. Worked out great. I've not heard from my wife since I sent the picture of that, so I'm not sure what that means, but I'll figure it out later. Yeah, thanks. Hey, today we are continuing a series we've been in the last couple weeks, and I'm excited about it. I was thinking about today's message, and I was thinking about so for those who don't know, we have 3 kids. My wife and I have 3 kids, and they're all very incredible kids. They're all very different kids. They're all a lot. They all have big personalities. Gavin, my youngest, he's like a really good mix between Brooklyn and Mason, my two other kids. Gavin feels things like really deep in him, you know. Mostly what he feels is joy and lunacy. He is bonkers. Our house was very loud pre-Gavin, and Gavin is the loudest one in the family by like a pretty wide margin. So he's a lot, but he mostly feels joy, and he's really happy. And we're in the middle of 2 kids playing baseball and 1 playing travel softball. And Gavin plays. This is his first year in coach pitch, and he loves to play baseball. And when he plays, what's awesome about it is he just smiles the whole time. Like, it doesn't matter what he's doing. He has the biggest smile on his face. He hits the ball, and he charges down to first base, and the whole time he's like. And it's so delightful. It is the exact opposite of Mason, who does this most of the time when he's on the baseball field. So not winning there, but it's okay. So Gavin feels things. He feels things really big. And most of the time, Gavin feels happiness, joy, excitement, all these things. But when Gavin gets sad, it's like depth of his soul sad, you know? And it's mostly heartbreaking, but not always. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Gavin was, he loves to put together Legos and things like that, and that's something that Mason loves to do, and so Gavin's kind of picked it up along the way. And Gavin was trying to put together this Lego set, and he had gotten stuck because he doesn't really want my help a lot. He wants to kind of do it on his own. You know, he watches Mason do it on his own, and so he wants to do it on his own. So he had gotten pretty deep into this build when he realized that he had done something wrong early on, like stuff, you know, pieces weren't fitting together, and it overwhelmed him. You know, he was devastated because in Gavin's 6-year-old mind, the whole thing is now ruined, right? So I get home and he's real upset, and he tries really hard to hold it in, but he just kind of goes like this. And I'm like, Gavin, what's wrong? And he said, I broke my Lego set. Gavin, hold on. Pause. What? Tell me what happened. Tell me what actually happened. And he goes through and he's like, well, you know, I'm to this step and I can't, it doesn't fit. Stuff doesn't fit. And I did something wrong, but I don't know what. And I mean, it's like, listen, I don't want to oversell this. It's like devastation at the soul level for Gavin in this moment, you know? Like, the world is ruined. Things will never be the same. We may as well just give up now. And I'm like, buddy, listen. Is Daddy good at building stuff? Yes. Do you think Daddy can fix this? I don't know. Okay. Yes, Gavin, obviously Daddy can fix this. So we go over to the table and we do it. And of course, you know, so we get it apart, we fix it. And when it gets back to, you know, when I get it back to where he can now move on and he can take the next step, just so much excitement. I mean, so much joy. Now, I tell you that story because it's going to play into the sermon today. We are in this series about doubt. And this is our 3rd week in it. If you weren't here, let me get you caught up very, very quickly. We started this series off 2 weeks ago by talking about how doubt has this really weird place in our faith, where for a lot of us, we look at doubt and we have doubts, but we typically tend to go one of 2 roads with the doubt. We either kind of bury it, shove it, pretend it's not real, or we engage it, but it ends up leading to a lot of destructive things. Those are 2 very common roads that I see people take with doubt. The one that actually is the most concerning to me is when people try to hide and bury their doubt, because for a lot of people, we grew up in churches that, whether implicitly or explicitly, taught us that doubt is bad. And doubt can be bad, don't get me wrong. It can lead to very destructive roads, but there is absolutely, without question, a road toward doubt becoming something that deepens our faith, not destroys it. And that's what this whole series is about. How do we gain the benefits of doubt without ending up down a road that leads to destruction? So we talked about that in week 1, and then last week we talked about, we looked at we talked about this concept of deconstruction and how for many, many people, they go through this process of deconstruction. In fact, I think it's probably a necessary process on some level for everyone. And critically, to deconstruct in a way that is healthy and productive and leads to a deepening of faith, not a destruction of faith, you need the right people around you who can help you rebuild that faith. Now, today is, I think, the most important message in this series. Listen, they're all important, but this one is the one that if you don't do this, nothing else will matter. Nothing. It does not matter what else you do. If you don't do today's message, you will at some point walk down a road to destruction of faith because of doubt. But if you do this part of it, and frankly, if you do this part of it and you don't do anything else, I think that on its own can lead you down a road toward deepening. So I don't want to oversell it, but truly today is the critical day of all of them. So we're going to look at two stories to see this principle, and I also want to mention, just as we get into this, that again I've been in full-time professional ministry in one way or another for almost 20 years now, and so I've worked with a lot of people, I've talked with a lot of people, I've heard a lot of stories, I've engaged a lot of people in this process, and in my experience, this is one of the hardest steps for people to take. And so today, if you're a person who grew up in a church context or grew up in a faith background that really discouraged doubt, that tended to say, like, doubt is bad, if that's you, I really, really hope that today is helpful. Because if you don't do it, you can't get anywhere productive with it. So we're going to look at two stories. The first story we're going to look at, let me set it up a little bit. Jesus has been doing amazing things. This story is found in Matthew chapter 14. So we've got 13 chapters of Jesus' life and his ministry. He's been doing incredible things. He's been healing people. He's been driving out demons. The disciples have seen him do ridiculous, incredible things. In fact, right before this story, Jesus fed 5,000 people or 5,000 men and then their families, depending on the translation that you read. It was an amazing moment where Jesus gets these 2 loaves of bread or 2 fishes and 5 loaves. I should have reviewed it. I don't know. It was one or the other. A little bit of food. And he did a miracle and fed thousands of people with it. The disciples just watched this. That's important context. After that happens, they go and they're going through another town, and there's this crowd that's following them around. And so Jesus sends them by boat across a lake. And when I say lake, I mean, this is a big lake, like a really, really big lake. Like the kind of lake that you can barely see the other side of the lake. Huge lake. So there's this crowd. Jesus sends the disciples ahead to their next destination. And the disciples are kind of like, why is he doing it? He needs to be with us. We don't, but they go, they listen to him and they go. And they get out onto the lake, and a little while later, they see somebody walking on the lake, which, I don't know about you, that would throw me off a little bit. What's happening? This is not normal. And so the disciples are like, it's a ghost, because what else do you think? As it turns out, it's not. It's Jesus. He's walking to them on the water. And the disciples they're totally thrown off, except for one. One of the disciples he's like pumped about it. It's Peter. And Peter's known for kind of being brash and a little bit unwise at times. And so Peter's like, Jesus, if that's really you, tell me to walk to you, and I'll get out of this boat. And Jesus says, come on. So Peter steps out of the boat, and one of the most amazing moments in the history of humanity, Peter, for a couple of seconds, walks on the water toward Jesus. And it's not a magic trick, it's a miracle. But then, Peter sees the waves, and he feels the wind, and he remembers, I'm standing on a lake. And in a moment, what exactly went through Peter's mind, we don't know, but he doubts. And as soon as he does, he begins to sink. Jesus reaches out his hand to save him. And when Jesus pulls him back out of the water, Jesus says something to Peter that is tremendously important. We find it in Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 31. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Now, if you've heard this story before, I don't want to presume what your mind thinks. I grew up in the church. I've been in church my whole life. I've heard this story probably bordering on 100 times. I've always assumed a tone in Jesus' voice. I've always assumed a timbre of his voice. I've always assumed the way he asked the question. But have you ever thought about that? I wonder what way Jesus did ask this question. For me, for whatever reason, and maybe this is not you, but for me, I always heard it in sort of a negative tone, an annoyed tone. Like, how could you have doubted, Peter? Peter, come on, man. Like a disappointed, you've let me down kind of a tone. But I've recently started to wonder if maybe that wasn't the tone that Jesus used. I've recently started to wonder if the tone was not, Peter, why did you doubt? I've started to wonder if the tone was perhaps, Peter, why did you doubt? I say that because I've reflected a lot. Having kids fundamentally changes you, and it changes you in so many ways that are good and so many ways that are challenging. And for me, one of the biggest ways that it's changed me is I reflect so much on my relationship with God the Father and my struggles and my wrestling with God the Father throughout my life and the assumptions that I make about God the Father. And I think about my own relationship with my kids. And I think so much about how hard I try to be a good dad and how hard I try to be patient and how hard I try to be kind to them, but also, not let them get away with stuff. And there's no playbook in it, and every kid's different, and it has been the greatest challenge of my life, bar none, without shadow of a doubt. And I think about that because then when I think about the words Jesus spoke here, I think about, well, how might I have spoken those to my kids? When Gavin wasn't sure if I could fix his Lego set, or when Mason wasn't sure if I could fix the Crunch Lab that he messed up, or when Brooklyn wasn't sure if I could fix the thing that she broke because her room's a disaster, or whatever it might have been, when they have those moments where they're like, Daddy, can you do this? I don't want to say I never get annoyed. That probably would be untrue. But for the most part, it's like, yeah, I've got it. I've got it. Don't you know? Haven't I fixed enough? Brooklyn, you're 11. I've fixed enough things for you. Why did you doubt? And it's not an annoyed, disappointed question. It's a question that invites her to really ask herself, why did I doubt? What is it that caused me to ignore the examples and the evidence that I have and to question now what might happen moving forward? Why didn't I have peace that, Dad's got this? And I can't help but wonder, as Jesus asked the question of Peter this day, I can't help but wonder if the tone of his voice was not a tone of disappointment, but was a tone inviting Peter to ask some hard questions. Because for Peter, what he should have known is, I've watched this guy do unbelievable things. I just watched him take a tiny bit of food and turn it into enough to feed thousands. So why am I not certain of what he can do? It also makes me wonder because I think of the second story that we're going to go to today. And it's a story that we've talked about actually the last 2 weeks, but I didn't give you the end of the story. See, after Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead, one of the disciples named Thomas doubted that it was all real. And as I've kind of tried to draw out the last couple weeks, it makes sense because people don't rise from the dead. It doesn't happen. Now, Jesus raised people from the dead. But it's a whole different thing to raise someone else from the dead, as difficult as that is. It's a whole different thing to do that versus raise yourself from the dead when you're dead. And so Thomas doubts, and the disciples, Jesus has appeared to them already, and they're telling Thomas all about it, and Thomas is like, listen, guys, until I see the nail holes in his hands, and I can place my hand in his side where the spear pierced him, I'm not going to believe. And it's a fair doubt to have. So we've looked at that story the last couple weeks, but what I didn't do was tell you what happened right after where we left off last week. We're going to pick that up today in the book of John chapter 26, starting in verse 26. A week later, after Thomas had said, I won't believe, A week later, the disciples were in the house again, the house where they had just had that conversation, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them, which also, listen. Sometimes we don't humanize the Bible. Like, we don't recognize the people in the Bible were people. The disciples were humans. I think Jesus has a great sense of humor. And I like to picture Jesus in this case being like, I'm gonna just go in the house. Like, the doors are locked. I'm gonna just pop on in and see what they do. Because, like, come on. Wouldn't that be hilarious if you had that ability to do it to your friends? Like, everybody's just hanging out eating and you're like, I'm just gonna kind of pop in the corner for a minute, see how long it takes somebody to notice me. I don't know that that's what happened here, but I like to read it that way, okay? So I imagine the disciples are surprised. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came in and stood among them, and he's like, hey, peace be with you. And then he said to Thomas, just right away, hey, Thomas, buddy, put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Thomas, stop doubting and believe. This is a powerful, powerful moment to me as we think about doubt, the implications of doubt, what it looks like to doubt, and how we can engage doubt in a way that leads to a deepening of faith. Because the assumption that I had growing up, the assumption that probably many of you had, is that doubt is a bad thing. And please don't misunderstand me. There's actually just a couple of verses later, Jesus says to Thomas, hey, listen, you believed because you saw, but blessed are those who believe when they didn't see. And so absolutely, there's an element of kind of this blind faith in who God is that is a good thing. But please don't mistake a good thing, what is a good thing, and then erroneously say, well, if you doubt, that means it's naturally a bad thing. And what I mean by that is in this moment, Jesus knows exactly why Thomas doubts. Jesus knows exactly what's going through his mind. And so as he pops in the room and says, hey guys, the first thing he does is he engages the exact doubt that Thomas had. Jesus wasn't there the week before when Thomas said to the disciples, said to his friends, unless I see his hands and put my hand where the spear pierced him, I won't believe. Jesus knows it happened. He wasn't there, but he knows. And when he enters the room, the very first thing that he does is he engages Thomas's doubt exactly where he was in exactly the way Thomas needed. That's powerful. It's super powerful for those of us who have this kind of block in our soul, thinking that God is going to be disappointed with us if we doubt. It's possible that God will be disappointed in the same way that it is disappointing to me when my kids don't assume I can fix the thing that's broken. But I'm not disappointed in them as my children. And there's a difference. Yeah, I'm like, come on, you guys. And is there a piece of disappointment in that? Yeah. But is that what's driving me? No. Rather, what's driving me in that moment is I want to demonstrate to you guys that you can count on me. I want to demonstrate to you that I've got this. And Jesus takes the same approach with Thomas. And it's this kindness and compassion, because Jesus could have entered the room and he could have been like, hey guys, Thomas, by the way, come on, man. Haven't you seen enough out of me? Haven't you seen the things I can do enough that you just believe at this point? Oh, you want to see my hands and my side? No, you can see me standing here. That should be good enough. But he doesn't. He shows him his hands. He says, put your fingers in my side so that you can feel where the spear was. Thomas, trust me. Now, this is crucial, because when we think about doubt, when we think about anything, frankly, the way that we approach that thing is so informed by our perspective. And for so many of us, again, maybe you didn't grow up like me, maybe you don't have the background that I have, but for me, I saw doubt as an obstacle. I saw doubt as an obstacle toward my faith, in my faith. But I don't think that's the way God sees it. And if you're somebody that sees doubt as an obstacle, what I want you to know is that what you see as an obstacle, God sees as an opportunity. We see doubt as an obstacle, but God sees doubt as an opportunity. In this moment, when Jesus could have said all kinds of different things to Thomas, what he does is he takes that moment to demonstrate to Thomas exactly what Thomas needed to trust him more. What's fascinating is that later on, Thomas continues as a disciple, and he becomes a crucial piece of the early church spreading. And he wasn't limited in that because he doubted, but rather Jesus invited him into it. Here are my hands. Here is my side. Thomas, I get it. I understand why you doubt. Thomas, you shouldn't be doubting. You should know I've got this. But I'm not going to berate you for it. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't make sense. Of course it makes sense. Instead, I'm going to demonstrate to you. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to see. And so often for us as people, we hide our doubt from God because we see it as an obstacle. But God doesn't shy away from that. He doesn't berate us for it. He steps into it, and he invites us to dig deeper. So does God want us to doubt? No. No. Those two things can be true at the same time. God doesn't want us to doubt, but when we doubt, God can still meet us in it with compassion and with love. I called the sermon today, Doubting God the Right Way, which I almost didn't, because I was like, that, somebody might have a problem with even saying it that. Because the reality is God doesn't want us to doubt. He's not pumped when we doubt. But again, those things can be true at the same time. God doesn't want us to doubt, but he can meet us with compassion inside our doubt. And for so many of us, we are just like Thomas. I'm just like Thomas. I would love to be able to stand here and say, man, after Jesus rose from the dead, I'd have been like, great, amazing. But I probably would have been right with him. I'd have been like, I don't know, guys. This just doesn't seem like it could be possible. We see doubt as an obstacle, but God sees it as an opportunity to demonstrate, to prove who he really is. So there's a pretty simple way, I think, to make sure when it comes to doubt that we engage doubt in the right way and that we don't hide our doubt. There's a pretty simple way to do it. And to look at that, we're going to look at one more story from the New Testament about doubt that's a pretty powerful story. At this point, there's this huge crowd following Jesus. I don't know exactly where he was. The text isn't super clear, but regardless, there's a huge crowd following Jesus. And as they do, a man shows up in the crowd with his son. And the man starts talking to Jesus, and he's like, Jesus, I brought my son to you. My son, he is possessed by a spirit. Now listen, this is one of those stories that when we read it today in our culture, in our context, for a lot of us, we just kind of like avoid it. Just ignore it. I didn't grow up in a church context where we were like driving out demons and stuff, We just kind of, like it's there, but and we would say things like, well, that probably was something that happened then, but we're not sure it happened so much now. It can be weird, okay? So get past that a little bit. Now, if you're comfortable with it, no problem. But I know for some of us, we start talking about demon-possessed people, and it's like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. That's okay. You don't have to know how you feel about it. What matters is not how you feel about it today. What matters is what Jesus did in the midst of it. So there's this man who shows up with a demon-possessed boy. He's his son, and he's been this way for pretty much his whole life. He tells Jesus that he's already asked the disciples to drive out the spirit, but that they weren't able to do it. And so Jesus says, hey, bring me the boy. And a fascinating conversation takes place in Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 20. So they brought him being the son who was possessed. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and he rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Now listen, regardless how you feel about all this, regardless of what you think about demon possession and all that kind of stuff, that scene would rattle you, yes? Even if you don't know what's going on, that scene's gonna rattle you. There's this young boy, probably about 9 or 10 years old, rolling around on the ground, shaking, foaming at the mouth. Now Jesus just takes a beat. He looks at the boy's father and he's like, hey, how long has he been like that? From childhood, the man answered. It being the spirit, it has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. And then notice what the man says, but if is not a word of certainty, if is a word of doubt. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. Now, this is rhetorical. Based on your experience thinking about doubt and faith, how do you imagine Jesus responds? if you don't know the story, you might imagine that Jesus says, well, if you would have had faith, I would have done something. You might imagine that Jesus somehow calls out the lack of faith, because the man doesn't say, I know you can do something. He says, if you can do something. Now, Jesus does call that out. He says, if you can, said Jesus. Everything is possible for one who believes. So he calls out the man's doubt. But that's not the fascinating part of the conversation. The fascinating part is the response of the man to Jesus calling out his lack of faith. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't make sense. I do believe. So help me to overcome not believing? Doesn't make sense at all. Except that it does. Because if you've been a Christian for any period of time, you have experienced exactly this. You have experienced a deep-seated belief in who God is, but within a specific context going, but that seems impossible. I wrestle with this all the time. All the time. And I can't tell you. I mean, I could spend hours upon hours upon hours, probably days upon days, telling you the moments in my life that God has demonstrated and proven his faithfulness to me. And yet I still have moments where I'm like, I know God can, but. And I don't tell anybody because I want to look like I've got good faith. But inside, I'm going, well, God, if, God, if, God, if, God, if, God, if. God, if you followed God for any period of time, you know exactly what it is like to stand in a place where you go, I believe in who you are, but I'm struggling to believe you're going to do this thing. I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. There is not a more honest, genuine, humble expression of doubt in the Bible than that one. Jesus' response, he heals the boy. He heals him. He doesn't make a big deal about the man's response. The man humbly offered himself up, expressing his faith and dependence, but also expressing his humanity. Not shying away from the fact that while he did believe in Jesus, he also struggled to believe that Jesus could do this thing because it was an impossible thing. And so in just a moment of complete honesty and transparency and openness, he says, I do believe, but please help me with the part of me that doesn't. And what does Jesus do? He meets him right there in the same way that he did with Thomas. He meets the need. Now, why does that matter so much? Because I think that as we look at this man's response, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. There's really three things that we can kind of pull out of this that encompass one major important thing. And the first that we see is that this man speaks his doubts about God. And for us, when we doubt, we need to speak our doubts about God. I do believe, but there's a part of me that doesn't. There's a part of me that isn't sure you can accomplish this thing. You just told me anything is possible for someone who believes, but I don't know that I can believe this. He speaks it. He speaks it. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't bury it. He doesn't try to cover over it. He doesn't just move on from it. He doesn't lie about it. He's honest. He speaks his doubts about God. For you, when you doubt the Lord, speak it. Speak it. You must speak it. The second thing the man does is he speaks his dependence on God. For you and I, when you doubt the Lord, speak your doubt and speak your dependence. I do believe. Help me overcome. God, I can't believe this thing without you helping me overcome my unbelief, because this thing's impossible. And so if I'm going to get past my unbelief, it has to come from you. There's a humility. There's a There's a trust, ironically, in the man saying, I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief. There's a trust that the man is speaking to God in that moment. I know I can't get past my unbelief if it's not you, so would you help me? I'm not gonna go read a self-help book. There's nothing wrong with self-help books. I'm not gonna go talk to my friends. There's nothing wrong with talking to friends. We talked last week about how important the people in your life are when it comes to doubt. There's nothing wrong with those things. But if you're gonna get past your unbelief, the only way you're gonna get past your unbelief is by depending on the one who will never fail you. Because people will. Circumstances will. Situations will, but God never will. And so when we go to him humble saying, I do believe, but I need you to help me with the parts of me that don't, he will meet you there. And as he does over time, it's like when Gavin came to me and said, Daddy, can you fix this? Yeah, bud, I can. Let me demonstrate to you can trust me, or that you can trust me. And the next time something's broken, buddy, just come talk to me. You don't need to get all upset about it. You don't need to doubt that I can fix it because I've got it. I'll help you get past that. But you got to tell me. Because critically, what's right there on the surface, but at the same time somewhat hidden, is that the man spoke his doubt to God. And for you and me, that's what we must do. We must speak our doubts, all of them, to God. We must speak our doubts about God. We must speak our dependence on God, and we must speak them to God. And that's the part that so many people get wrong. We might speak our doubts to friends. We might speak our doubts to family members. We might speak our doubts to a pastor, a small group leader. We might speak our doubts to all kinds of people, but the person we don't speak them to is the only one we must speak them to, because we're afraid that he'll be angry with us. We're afraid he'll be disappointed in us. We are afraid that he will be upset because we didn't have faith. But let me ask you this. If that day that I got home and Gavin was upset about his Lego set, if he hadn't talked to me about it, could I have fixed it? No. I couldn't have. I wouldn't have even known. Because I'm a man, he's God. He knows your doubt. He knows the areas that you struggle. He knows the places in your life where you believe, but you also have unbelief. He already knows. I mean, that's one of the funny things about it. When we try to hide our doubt from God, all it does is drive a deeper wedge in, because he knows. You ever have a conversation with somebody who's got a problem with you and you know they've got a problem with you, like it's clear as day, but they won't tell you what the problem is? Does that build your relationship or tear it down? It tears it down. And so what happens when God's up in heaven going, hey, would you just bring your things to me? Cast your burdens on me because I care for you. I've demonstrated that I love you all throughout the generations and in your life. So what happens when we have these moments of doubt in God and we choose to not share them with him because we're afraid? All it says to God is, I don't really trust you. I don't really trust you with the depth of me. I don't trust that you're safe. I don't trust that you're kind. I don't trust that you will meet me. I don't trust that you're compassionate. I'm gonna withhold this part of me to protect me. And instead, what God wants us to do is just say, here I am. I do believe, but I need you to help me with my unbelief. I do believe, I do trust you, but I need you to help me with the places where I don't. And it's in those moments when we are willing to open our soul bare before the Lord that he meets us. And that he demonstrates, that he shows us his hands, that he shows us his side, and that he may speak to you, hey, I wish you hadn't doubted me. Hey, if I can fix the Lego set, do you know who I am? Do you know what I've done? Do you remember that? And 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 if I got it. The God that I know, the God that I have walked with for nearly 40 years in my life, here's what I can tell you. When you doubt, and when you speak your doubts about God, and when you speak your dependence on God, and when you speak them both to God, what I can tell you is that he will meet you with compassion and kindness. He will remind you who he is. Please don't misunderstand. He will remind you that he is the one who laid the foundations of the earth and hung the stars in the sky and put the galaxies into motion. He will remind you that if he could do all of that, your small trivial problems are nothing. Your doubt is nothing. And I'm not trying to trivialize your problems. But I'm saying when you put galaxies into motion, nothing we face is that big a deal. He will remind you of those things. He will remind you of who he is. And he will do it so that the next time you face something that causes you to doubt, you might just say, no, I know my God's got this because I saw what he did there. And I saw what he did there. And I saw what he did there. And over years and years and years, he will build a faith in you that overcomes all doubt. It won't be a smooth road because we're difficult, we're humans. It won't be seamless. But as we laid out in the very first week of the series, when it comes to doubt, there's a road that leads to destruction, but there is also a road that leads to the deepening of faith. And when we are willing to trust, to believe in our hearts, that for us, faith might be an obstacle, but for God, it's an opportunity, and we're willing to go to him and speak our doubts and speak our dependence and speak them to him, he will meet us. He will change us. He will demonstrate his faithfulness, and he will grow our faith in ways that we can't possibly imagine today. And so, as you leave from here and enter into your week this week, as you have moments where you doubt, whatever that might look like, big or small, take them to the Lord. Take them to the Lord. Speak your doubts. Speak your dependence. Not to the person riding in the car, not to your brother or sister, not to your mom or dad, not to your friends. Speak them to the Lord. I cannot promise you that in that moment he will change everything. He might. He probably won't, though. What I can promise you is that he will begin taking you down a road where you'll be able to start to see all that he's done, and that will lead to an unshakable faith. Let me pray for us today.